Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD Dev Call. It's March the 30th, 2020. And as every week, we go over the stuff that we've done in the past week and then go over any news we might have and discuss open issues or questions. Yes, and please put a name on the attendees list, although it's almost complete from the past week, so this should be fine. I start with myself. So I work normally on Rust IPLD, and the past week has been pretty good because I'm finally found a good way of having a custom codec table through the whole chain of IPLD. So the problem is that you might want to use some custom codec table because you have space limitations, or you just have only like 3 codecs you always use. And in other languages like JavaScript, it's quite difficult. In Go, it comes from somewhere magic, and I think in Rust I found a good way of using generics for it. The internal code, it makes the internal code a bit more difficult, but from the outside, it's just a simple export of a type, so you don't even see the generic and things should just work. If you then need to do something special, like you want to have a custom table, it's still possible. It's a bit more work, but yeah, still possible. So I have 2 PRs open. They still need review, which might take some time because it gets reviewed by someone from the FileCon team, and they're currently pretty busy, but yeah, I think that it will land this or next week. And then I will move on working on the blog API again for Rust, which should be easier then. All right. Then next on my list is Michael.
Hey, yeah. So I was sick all last week, so not much changed. Yeah, now that I'm kind of back into the swing though, and wrote some code last night, I had some interesting new snags. Like, there's some weird lambda throttling that I'm seeing where, I can start like thousands of concurrent functions, but only 50 will really like complete at a time. Which is odd because they're just stalling. And I thought that it was on the right side pushing stuff into S3, but then I realized that it's not. And it's something to do with actually just creating car files for JavaScript with our data store car. So I need to figure out what is going on in there and maybe sync up with Rod at some point to figure out why we'd be hitting some kind of weird limit there. I wrote an improvement or a feature to the data store car library for pulling in a complete graph. Rod ended up turning that into a PR to JS IPFS that does import and export of car files. And then this sort of graph store stuff that we've been talking about for a while, basically a storage interface that kept track of and could give you more information than just like, hey, I have this block or not. More like, do you have the entire graph for all of this? I've been starting to prototype that over in DagDB because I have that problem when I'm syncing the graphs around. I don't want to suffer a full graph traversal on every synchronization. So definitely made some progress. I have an in-memory prototype working right now that people can poke at if they like. And that's me.
Thanks. The next one is Eric.
Oh, hi. So I had kind of a fun week. After not having too much to report for a while, I now have too much to report. So I finally landed all of those big refactors in the Go IPLD Prime repo. And so all the new interfaces are there on master. I did a tag right before that in case anybody out there is wanting to not deal with this yet. But I'm excited because these go faster and they're going to be a good way forward. And it even includes getting the fancy dotted syntax that Rod was suggesting would be nice. So you can say like node package name dot style dot whatever, and that works. And so now that that's all cleared out of the way, I've started working on CodeGen again. I left the old CodeGen progress behind and sort of called that lessons learned and did a clean slate for the new one. And that's going much, much faster this time with the lessons learned, so thank goodness. Getting a couple of things improved on this second pass as well, like getting all of the infrastructure in place to be able to support aliasing symbols in the code gen in case you happen to have like collision issues. I want to be able to decollide them. And this is going to be able to do it. The amount of code needed overall for especially the assemblers of values in this new system is kind of substantial though. So as before, this is just going to be a while. But most of the things that were roadblocks the last time that I was in this area, all of the core interface changes make them not roadblocks anymore. So thank goodness. The other fun thing that I learned this week is of cross-language interest, probably, unlike most of the things I have talked about lately. I've been looking at selectors again with Reba, who I guess isn't here this week, but in large part thanks to him building lots of good test cases around DAG import and export commands and some car stuff. We've discovered that there are some topologies of data which querying with selectors is no fun at all. So if you think of selectors as being very similar to regexes for structured data, regexes apply on a linear string, right? Part of the nature of a regex is it depends on the data before the match in order to decide where the matches are, right? And in regexes, it depends on the data after as well. But with selectors, we just have the data leading up to. And so that includes effectively the path that you take to get to someplace, not just the data itself at that point that you reach. And so this means selectors basically require expanding data. And we can, it turns out, run into a situation pretty easily that looks an awful lot like entity expansion attacks in XML parsers of old, sometimes known as the billion laughs attack. Basically, if you have a DAG that involves a couple of nodes and then it splits out, and then each of these nodes refers to the same child nodes, and then maybe repeat this a couple of times, by the time you get somewhere down on this tree, the number of different paths that you can take but still reach the same node can be exponential. And if our definition of selectors is you have to keep track of all of the paths in order to decide whether or not you match things, this kind of hurts. So we found that that's the case. And now the question is sort of, well, okay, what do we do about this? I'm probably going to end up doing a couple of simple things like providing more control to user code to say, okay, if you're doing the link load in the middle of this, then you can return this special value, which says skip. It's not an error, it's just a skip. And that might get us out of some corners, but it's not a very complete solution. Other more complete solutions, well, I don't know. Some of this almost brings into question the whole design principle of selectors ignore block boundaries, because it's turning out that solving this problem while ignoring block boundaries is not the easiest thing. Another opportunity to improve stuff might be a more complex form of memoization for where we've been before, like store a tuple of the CID of the link that we're traversing and the selector that we're about to apply to it. And that might do some pretty clever memoization. But there's still a lot of more complex questions even lying behind that answer, and it's not something that you can exactly implement for free either. So, so we've just discovered that question space this week and started probing it, I guess, and we'll see where that goes. That's fun. Anybody have opinions about the APIs for that and how the ergonomics should be, especially send me notes. And that's it for me.
So how about, just to clarify, could you refactor the selectors to do a different algorithm, so you can do like a depth first versus a breadth first search? Or is it like there's just one canonical way of actually traversing the graph?
We have defined selectors to be depth first, partially because iterative deepening depth first search is one of my favorite algorithms.
Okay. And that's what I mean. Breadth first is larger memory. So depth first, you have basically you have yeah.
But I don't know if it really matters either. The problem is, as long as the path that you take to get there is part of the definition that you're using of your query, then you reach this problematic state, because that effectively means you're doing your search over a tree and not a DAG, which means you're steamrolling the DAG into a tree, and that means you get the exponential expansion. And so our options are do something very clever or change that part of the definition, and then you get a very different thing. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, right now we default to depth first. Like that's our kind of deterministic algorithm to date. I mean, we could probably add an option later to change that, and then it would still, I mean, because that option would be in the selector, we would still have deterministic selectors, so that would be fine. But yeah, I don't think that it changes this problem, because you could still create DAGs using deduplicated branches where it's very cheap to create a really large DAG that would then be incredibly expensive to traverse with certain selectors, which is why you
Right.
have this.
Right, like the problem is we can't actually manualize things just based on the link CID alone, which you might intuitively think at first glance, but that doesn't work, because it's possible that if you reach the same data through two different paths, your selector might match one and not match in the other because of the path that it took to get there. And so the most obvious thing you can do to memoize is incorrect, which, yep, that gets us here.
So yeah, so we have to memoize the selection criteria for the block and the block CID together.
Yep. And so I think that's probably the outline of the most correct answer, but it's also somewhat non-trivial to code up. So we'll see.
Cool. Next on my list is Chris.
Hey guys. So after I kind of showed the IPLD schema editor last week, I posted on GitHub pages, so now you can just go to that link and use it, which is kind of cool. And then I kind of tweaked the Prism.js color syntax highlight rules to try to show more of the, I guess, how would you call it? Just highlight things better. And then found a minor issue with the hash map schema, which I think Rod addressed. And don't really have anything on my plate right now. So just again, extending the offer to help. If you need help with anything, I'm willing to jump in. That's it.
Did the fix for that actually change the schema?
No, did it? I don't think so. No, it's just a syntax change.
Oh, okay. Actually,
it was
that
using
wasn't,
like, some keywords.
Okay. That actually wasn't even my real question. My real question was like, did it actually change the encoding? Because like if it changed the encoding, then I need to update a lot of things.
No, and you made a comment to me a few weeks ago when you were touching it that the schema seemed to be out of sync with what the code was producing, which I don't know if you still want to stand by that, but that does sound reasonable to me, because I did leave that code in a flux state where I was doing schema stuff and then that, and I hadn't quite synchronized everything, I feel. So I think it does need some revisiting anyway, just to make sure everything connects. But it's just a shame we don't have tooling that connects the schema to the code yet. So we'll get there.
Yeah, and if anyone has any feature requests on that schema editor, feel free to send them my way and I can take a look at them. So.
Do you have the impression that getting a parallel pane that shows like the JSON version of it is easy?
It shouldn't be hard, and it's mainly actually a UI interface issue. If anyone has an idea about how to do it in a sensible way, I thought about maybe having a button that kind of toggle it between, one pane like it is right now, and then split pane that shows a JSON. But that was kind of my main thing. I'm like, I'm not sure how I want to do this UI wise. And so I know that request was made before, but that makes sense. I could do it, sure.
The JSON's actually really big too. So like, if you're even just a little bit down in the document, you would have to be really far down in JSON at that point. So they don't like stay side by side very easily. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I don't know if having it side by side is the best user experience. I mean, a button just say download JSON and then you can download it, but that it'd be nice to be able to see it too. And then you get into dialogues or separate pages. I don't know. So that was my main barrier to actually moving forward is what's the best UX for it.
I think maybe another tab, right? Like similar to the preview tab or something, right? Because you probably don't need to see it at the exact same time, but if you do want to see it, you could just take over the view.
Yeah, that solves the scrolling sync issue. Otherwise, I know like some editors, I'm really fond of the HackMD editor online, and they have the synchronized scrolling between the markdown and the rendered thing solved. But I assume that
that's hard.
Enormously, yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah, the JSON's going to look different, right? It doesn't work that way. Well, I'll think about some more. I think I was just being a little bit lazy, and yeah, I'll figure out a way of doing it. I might even just do something simple like download as JSON just to get it done. But I got to think through the UI. The tab thing may work too. There's just no tab control, so I have to kind of implement tabbing myself. But I can find something, I'm sure. There's no, sorry, I should clarify. There was no tab control in tachyons, which was what I was pointed to use. So I'd have to roll my own or find a view one and adapt it over. So not a big deal, but again, just being lazy.
Cool. Next on my list is Rod.
So highlights for me. Am I on? Sorry. Yep. Highlights for me. Looking at the Go IPFS export import feature that that has been toyed with on Go IPFS. It's now into its. I don't think it's landed yet, and it's into another iteration. So it was pulled apart into 2 pull requests over there. Hasn't quite landed. I think there's still some discussion. I don't quite understand what they're aiming for with import, but there's something that they're trying to achieve with imports for really fast imports. I don't know. Dagger is the word that they've been using. There's some project called Dagger for throwing around blocks really fast. So their export is to a car file, a well-formed car file with essentially using selectors, using Hannah's selective car and IPLD prime selectors, just basically an all selector for now, but it's in place so that it can use an arbitrary selector, which is really nice. And I can imagine a command line where you would say export CID and then use Tim's selector shorthand to export a graph. That would be really cool to see. But for now, it's just CID, and then it'll get the whole graph. Import is, they're doing this thing where it's just basically import whatever it can find. So it'll accept a badly formed car. So, if the root doesn't exist in the thing, they even wanted to do no roots, but the Go car thing doesn't support that. But there was something about like they wanted to make it really flexible so it would accept pretty much anything that looked like a list of blocks. So I don't really understand what they're trying to achieve there fully. But anyway, I made a version of it for JavaScript for JS IPFS. So it roughly mirrors what's going on in Go IPFS, same sort of style. But it doesn't have tests, and I wanted to wait till all the fixtures and everything were finished for the Go IPFS before I put that in. I don't think I've heard from the JS IPFS folks whether they even wanted to accept it, because I know there was some hesitancy before about adding more weight to JS IPFS. So I I'd like a signal from them before I invest too much more time in that. But it is fun to see a car file created from an arbitrary graph, pull this graph out of IPFS, the IPFS network, stick it in a car file for me. That's pretty neat. So I like this feature for a bunch of reasons, but it's also exercising code that we've been working on. So it's nice. And the other thing I've been doing is diving into, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I hope they can make it into JS IPFS because it's added in the command line stuff, so it wouldn't end up in bundles. So I don't know what the objection to like adding weight is necessarily.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, I'm just picking up on that comment that was on your original issue where you opened saying add an export feature.
I think that was generally a concern about browsers. So,
right.
So I think that yours should be fairly immune to that. I mean,
and
if they're really
probably
picking at it over the npm install size, it's like, come on, like it already installs like a gig of dependencies. Like this is not this is like a rounding error.
Yeah, I think, and also that might have been before we really had all the car file stuff in place for JavaScript. So that maybe the thought was, well, this is going to add actually a lot more complexity to JS IPFS. But once you implement it with the libraries we've got now, it's like a page of code. It's not really that much, which is really neat as well. Like it's nice to be able to do something so complex in a small amount of code. So yeah, it's neat. I've been diving into some blockchain stuff for Filecoin archival purposes. And so far I'm looking at Bitcoin and Zcash. I know Zcash better than Bitcoin, even though it's really it's like Bitcoin plus. But it's making me aware of the incompleteness of the IPLD libraries we have, particularly on JavaScript. It doesn't match what we have in Go, and Go isn't quite up to scratch with what could be there. So I'm looking at the moment about how much I should invest in cleaning up those libraries. I think it would be nice to have those things work well and even seed some things onto the network, onto IPFS, so that the IPLD Explorer could display these nicely. That would be really cool. Like IPLD Explorer could be like one of those block explorers that they use to inspect blocks on these blockchains. But of course, the problem there is making sure that the network is seeded with all of the blocks. And that's probably not something that I want to sign up for just now. But something to explore anyway, because it is interesting data, and there is a heavy demand for this data as well. People use it a lot, so maybe it'd be good for us to be able to connect more to it and be more useful for it. So that's my main things.
Yeah, I have to add to the JavaScript, Bitcoin, and Zcash stuff, because so basically I've written them at my first week at Protocol Labs.
Right.
So feel free to basically remove them. Or so basically it was, so back then I had no idea about blockchains, and I have touched basically JavaScript after like 8 years or something. So really, like, feel free to just rewrite them completely or write something new. It's just, yeah.
No, it's not that bad. It's just that it's like so the Zcash one's pretty good, I think, because I took some of your work and contributed to it. I think we got to a better place.
Yeah.
The Bitcoin one is missing transactions, but aside from that, it's pretty parallel with Go IPFS, the Go Bitcoin library.
Yes, because basically this is what I did, because like I only knew nothing, so I looked at the Go one and just did whatever Go was doing and hoped that it was correct.
Yeah,
but
and one of the reasons I'm fairly enthusiastic about this is that I don't know enough about these blockchains, and I keep on running into these situations where, I hear these things coming out of these communities and I don't get the perspective. They think about things in different ways, and I'd like to understand that better. So diving in a bit more, I think, is also good for a good learning experience.
Yeah, you did the Zcash parsing thing. You might also do a Bitcoin one. So as far as I remember, so because like the Bitcoin JavaScript library I'm using, it's just like the best one I could find, but it's huge. Yeah. It's like an insane amount of code. So I have no idea why it is so big. So just in case, so basically, if you come to the conclusion it is better to basically fork your Zcash one and make it a Bitcoin one, might be good.
I think essentially, it would just be a case of forking the Zcash one and removing some stuff, and then it would probably
Exactly,
just work. Because
Yes.
So
But
I
just-
was thinking about that.
Yeah.
I'll look at it because I would like to get transactions in there, because it'd be nice to be able to make CIDs and everything for them.
There's
But,
even an issue open like for 2 years or so saying transactions are missing.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, so perfect. So yeah.
okay, well,
so,
I'll probably
yeah.
be getting to that soon. Then I'm keen for this. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So you know what, Rod, one thing I was doing was, rather than storing the blocks, because the Go IPLD plugin for
BTC.
Zcash and even Ethereum, it's not maintained anymore. So I've actually been just using the JSON RPC and storing that in IPLD. The hard thing is, I don't know if there's actually like the codec, if you actually use the codec, that this is Seaboard JSON, but it's an Ethereum transaction. Like it is one way of actually just encoding it.
Yeah, I'd like to have CIDs that match the way that we've been doing them in the past, which is the challenge. So the block matching the CID that you can then decode, because the CID, you should be able to inspect the CID, go into the multi-hash and get the actual block identifier that's the same that they use on their network. That's what I want to get. I want to make sure that's in sync.
Gotcha.
I'm a little bit intimidated by Ethereum. I know there's some complexity there that I'm not particularly looking forward to, and I just don't know enough about Ethereum as well to comment on that. But I'm a little bit afraid.
So you need the KCAC. Yeah, you're prepending it with a KCAC codec.
Yeah. The main problem with the Ethereum stuff is that like you need context from how you traverse to something, and we don't have that in the addressing format. So that's why there's all those other codecs, because those codec identifiers basically add the context that you would normally get.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's also something about the way we address things with CIDs is, it's meant to include a hash of the block, but I think for the transactions for all these blockchains, the transaction section of the blocks use the Merkle root, not the section hash. So the way we're doing CIDs don't quite match transaction identifiers, which seems like a bit of a problem to me. What I'd like to understand is, why did we ever have was there ever a suggestion that CIDs should also have a scheme whereby instead of doing a full hash, they can take like a Merkle root style hash, instead of a full block hash?
No, but there is a thread that links should be able to include paths. So you should be able to directly link into a subproperty. So you would have basically be like a CID path pair would be the link.
Yeah. But see, the difference is, so with a Bitcoin block header, you can take a CID and you can extract the original block ID from the CID itself, because it's just a double SHA-256 or whatever it is. So it's a straight double hash of the block, and we've got a double hash in multi-hashes. So that's fine. You can take a CID and then you could extract that, and then you could take that, reverse it for big endian, and stick it into a block explorer and inspect that. You can't do the same thing, as far as I know, with transactions, because when a block links to its transactions, it's linking to the Merkle root, not a hash of the whole transaction section of the block. So the CIDs that we make don't really bear any relationship, as far as I know, to the transaction section.
I mean, that's sort of okay though, because if you have that transaction block, it's a transaction block. You know that the link that is not actually pointing directly into the transactions. It's giving you the whole context from the root. So, but you know how to get from there to the transactions anyway. So I don't know that it's a huge problem.
Yeah. I'm speaking with half knowledge here, so I probably should just stop and then come back to it later. So it's interesting work anyway. It's a good education, so I'm enjoying being in this particular place for now. I wouldn't want to stay doing this. It doesn't thrill me that much.
That's the reason why why we don't have transactions because I've been there.
Right.
Yeah. So cool. Is there anything else? I mean, we're already half an hour in, but if there's any
let's get an
questions-
update from Johnny real quick. I can go over.
Yeah,
Oh,
so I'm still working on
sorry, yeah.
no worries. So I'm still working on IPID, so interplanetary identifiers, which is a DID method, basically publishing cryptographic key material and metadata to IPNS in the form of IPLD. And I've been working on how to cryptographically sign that using native CBORs. So, and I linked a paper that I wrote for the Rebooting Web of Trust that was supposed to be in Argentina just 2 weeks ago and got canceled. And Protocol Labs was nice enough to pay for my trip, but actually I had to cancel it, and because that's this global pandemic. It's just so annoying. But I'd love some feedback if you get a chance to read the paper. I mentioned a couple of GitHub issues about allowing for tag 98 in addition to 42, because then actually I can do native signing in CBOR with a tag 98 with a payload pointing to an IPLD tag 42. And I think, and then that allows me to keep everything in CBOR rather than trying to do the representation in COSE or JOSE signatures in IPLD. And so this gets into more of the IANA's MIME type representation. And there's another GitHub issue that I have out there about application / CBOR plus IPLD. So basically this is strict IPLD encoded in CBOR. Then there's also IPLD plus JSON. And I think, Michael, you had asked me about what does the plus mean? The plus mean is that it's a constrained type. There's like you could have application JSON, and then you actually can have applications JSON plus LD, which means linked data. So it's JSON, but it's a more constrained version of JSON, which is JSON LD. And the same thing applies here, which is that CBOR plus IPLD means that this is canonical CBOR representation in a native format, but it represents IPLD objects.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, I want to dig into this a little bit because there's another thread about adding a codec for COSE, and JOSE for that matter, and it heated up a little bit. There's actually, I think, some textile folks interested in it, and we're looking at what to do there. But I mean, the most obvious thing to do would be to just like be able to traverse into the payload, so that it actually like will decode the payload properly when you want to traverse into it. And yeah, so we're looking at how to build that out as a codec right now, and I would just want to make sure that none of it like conflicts with anything you've had to do here, or if there's anything odd that you had to do here that we should be aware of.
Yeah, the only thing is actually in strict IPLD, it ignores everything except for tag 42. So it won't allow for tag 98. And so I think that's my dilemma, which is that it's no longer IPLD, strict IPLD, because strict IPLD ignores everything except for tag 42 in order for it to be deterministic. And that's where...
Well, just tag CBOR specifically.
Yeah,
so,
DAG CBOR, I'm sorry, yes,
yeah,
DAG
yeah,
CBOR.
Yeah, and so if we add DAG COSE, we would just add enough affordance for that tag, basically. There's still no other tags.
Okay. Okay, so that's a good compromise, which is actually if allow a codec to be COSE plus CBOR, then it allows for the tag 98 in case, and 42 in case I'm all good.
Yeah. So it won't be, the codec won't be COSE, it'll be DAG COSE. So it's like our DAG, our regular DAG CBOR rules plus whatever we need for COSE, which includes like payload decoding and things like that. And the extra tags. So,
yeah, so
cool.
there's an example at the bottom of my Rebooting Web of Trust, which is actually written in CDDL representation. So basically it's a tag 98 where the payload points to a tag 42, which is a CID. And this should be also an authentic signature. I think I did go through the pain of actually validating to make sure this was working.
So that's an interesting take. So the payload is always a link in your case?
Yeah, so in this case, it's a COSE signature, tag 98, but this is in the format where the payload is a CID tag 42.
Oh, wait, hold on. So you're just signing the link. You're not signing.
Correct.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But it tells you that this is an EDD, which is algorithm -7, which it translates, if you look at the comment, is EDDSA 256, which is redundant, I think, in the CID, but it actually is properly formatted COSE. But the payload here is actually, and that's what you sign, is this tag 42, the CID. At least the binary representation of what that CID means. No, I'm sorry, yeah. So binary representation of the CID.
Right, and it ignores the tag information when it does the signing, right?
Yep.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, that's an interesting take. I guess I have to think about that for a little bit. I mean, one limitation here is that you can't inline the payload cover. So every block is really going to be 2 blocks if it includes the signature. But that is an interesting approach. I think maybe just have an affordance for both if you find. Okay, great. Yeah, this is great. I'll think a little bit. This gives me a lot to think about. Thanks.
All right, cool.
All right. So, but now, are there any other open things you want to discuss or questions?
No, after you stop the recording, I'll share one more thing with you.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we can do that. So, okay, if there isn't anything else, then goodbye to everyone and goodbye on the live stream, and we see us all next week. So,